Hello family, this is African Esquire and welcome to the Federation of African Liberation. We are a Pan-Africanist organization seeking to unite Africans throughout the diaspora with Africans on the continent, meaning us in America, us in the Caribbean, us in Europe, us who are actually in Africa. All of us have a common struggle, all of us have a common fight, so why not fight together? So what we're going to talk about today is a subject that is going to kind of teeter into other subjects. And that's really the subject of us African people throughout the diaspora being isolated from each other, and the fact that this isolation was actually intentional. So we're going to actually use this subject to talk about what's going on over in Togo. If you don't know, over in Togo there has been massive protests, massive revolts against the current regime in Togo, and those revolts are actually starting up again. Now, just a quick history, I'm not going to go into all of it. I have a longer video on Togo, but a quick history. Togo used to be a colony of France, like the European powers always did whenever they wanted to gain control of their former colonies after independence. They were not happy with the leader who took Togo to independence, so they decided to assassinate him using cooperative missions, and they put into place their guy. And that same regime still exists until today. And today the current president, his name is FAL and his father was the previous president of Togo. This family has held power for decades, over 30 years. And during this time, they've been very repressive over the people of Togo. However, their power has not just come from nowhere. I mean, if they're not being supported by the people of Togo, where is their power coming from? Of course, it comes from European support, particularly France, but also the United States and other people who see the regime, the dictatorship, as being an allied dictatorship. They receive monetary funds, they receive military equipment, and this is how the regime has been able to survive for so long. So the people are still saying, no, we do not want this regime. We want to actually have a government that represents the people of Togo. However, of course, this is going to be a fight, because you're not just fighting the current administration, you're also fighting every single European power that has decided that that regime does promote their own power. So this is what's been going on. It's the story in a lot of African countries. I would say probably every African country, because all of the dictators, or not even dictators, some of the presidents who were actually elected, all of them are puppets who are paid for by Western interests or Chinese interests. So it's very important to understand this is something that has been happening for a long time inside of Africa. So very briefly, because I like to give you visuals, I'm just going to give you a little visual of some of the things that has been happening in Togo, just so that you can understand the gravity of the situation that's happening over there.
One aspect of these human rights abuses has been the horrendous prison conditions. Prisoners in Togo are packed in overcrowded prisons where they are given inadequate food, water, and medical care. This has often resulted in disease and death in these prisons.
So, according to the prison authorities in Togo, out of more than 4,000 prisoners, only about 1,000 of them were actually convicted. The rest are waiting trial, and half of them have not been charged. In the main prison in the capital, Lome, for example, they have more than 2,000 inmates in a prison that was built for about 600 people. Talk about overpopulation. At a prison in Sevi, which is about 30 kilometers from Lome, about 250 people are locked up in a facility that was built for only 65 inmates. Now that's about 4 times the capacity. They put about 80 people in one cell. If the person has money to bribe the guards, then they will put him in a cell that has only 26 inmates. And not only that, prisoners are fed only once a day, and that meal is so pathetic that so many of them cannot even eat it. The equivalent of the food that they are feeding them every day is less than 30 cents. 30 cents. And if your wife is bringing you food, or someone from your family, that person has to pay about $2 to bribe the security guard before she will be allowed to enter with the food. Can you imagine how ridiculous that is? Now, they have to take turns to sleep at night. And of course, they sleep practically on top of each other. So at night, half of them would lie down to sleep and the others would stand up against the wall, waiting impatiently for their turn to sleep. Just imagine that. The medical facilities are so inadequate that several inmates caught a disease during a treatment for something minor. So you go in there for stomach pain, you can come out with tuberculosis or something. Yes, many sick prisoners have to bribe the security guards with about $3 before they will allow them to visit the infirmary, and of course they don't get adequate treatment from there. Prison guards take bribes before prisoners are allowed to shower. That means you don't shower every day, and they take bribe before they let them use the toilets. Just imagine when you really have to go and you still have to pay money. And then sexual harassment of female prisoners is so rampant that several babies have been delivered in the prison. They'll just take the baby away from them, the women are still there, and the prisoners die anyhow. They're so crowded that sometimes it takes days before the guards know that someone has died. Usually that's after the person started smelling.
Torture has also been commonplace in Togo. Not only are critics of the regime detained and tortured, but even the wives of certain critics of the regime have also been arrested and horribly tortured as well. Therefore, Togo has been one of the poorest countries in the world. Many people in Togo don't have access to clean drinking water. The conditions in the hospitals are so deplorable that some patients are laid down on the floor. Women are also made to give birth on the floor as well.
So this has been the issue that's been going on in Togo for a long time. And if you've been someone who followed the Federation of African Liberation, you probably know by now that this is a very important struggle to us. In particular, our Minister of Information, Dwayne Amawale, is very connected to the struggle in Togo against this current administration. And because of this, we have decided to definitely highlight what's going on over there, the oppression that our people are facing over there. And actually, Dwayne wrote a really great book about what's going on in Togo. If you stay tuned to the end of the video, I'll tell you how you can get a copy of this book for free. I know some of us like free things, but just stay tuned to the end of this video and I'll bring that up again. So how are we going to talk about this? We're going to talk about this in a way that pertains to us in the diaspora, us, not even just in the diaspora, us on the continent of Africa, but who don't necessarily look to our neighboring brothers and sisters, look to the neighboring countries who are facing things and understand that what they are facing is directly correlated to what we are facing. Now, we have to understand, and I'm speaking as a quote-unquote African American, and I use the quotes because to me, African American, what does that mean? You know, but this is what we call ourselves, so we'll say African American. We've been so isolated from the common African struggle. And we don't understand that this isolation is 100% intentional. The reason being, if we were allowed, our ancestors were allowed to actually know what was going on with our people, to actually have connections with our people, that would be deemed a threat to white supremacy. That's why people like Marcus Garvey, who actually wanted to actually go to Africa and actually have connections with the African people, they were considered a threat to not just national security, but a threat to white supremacy. And you have to ask, why was Marcus Garvey considered such a threat? Because if you know anything about Marcus Garvey, he kind of took the approach like Booker T. Washington. So there were people who wanted to go into the black liberation struggle by protesting against white people, by basically trying to get into voting, trying to get into white institutions. Then you have people like Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey who said, well, no, we're not going to try to get into these white institutions. We're not going to try to integrate into the society. Instead, what we're going to try to do is we're going to separate focus on ourselves, and we're not going to become a political nuisance, basically. And Marcus Garvey is one of those people. He basically said, all right, as far as trying to get into all these politics, y'all can have that. Right now, we're going to focus on building up Africans in America so that we can actually not just build up ourselves, but have connections to Africans in the Caribbean, in Europe, and most importantly, Africans in Africa. So that was what made Marcus Garvey so different. He wasn't trying to integrate into the American society. He was actually saying, let's focus on ourselves and focus on becoming a bigger and more dignified people so that we can actually control our own institutions, make our own universities, businesses, own our own shipping lines. That was his idea. So why was it that his idea to not get involved with the American politics, but actually to focus on what's going on in Africa, focus what's going on with Africans throughout the diaspora? Why was that considered such a threat? And if you know anything about Marcus Garvey, he was completely seen as a threat to the point where J. Edgar Hoover had him basically set up, and he was deported by the U.S. government by some false scheme. They put false charges against him, like they have against many of our African liberation leaders. But for him, it's very interesting because most people, even some KKK members, they didn't see him as necessarily a threat because he doesn't trying to integrate into American society. So what does that mean? The threat to white supremacy has nothing to do with you trying to integrate into white institutions. In fact, white supremacy can exist can work very well. It can exist all the same with Africans who integrate into institutions. Africans are integrated into Harvard University or Yale University, these very prominent universities. That does not make them less of white supremacist institutions. What makes them white supremacist institutions is the function being carried out by these universities, being carried out by these businesses, being carried out by Fortune 500 companies. The function is ultimately to benefit white supremacy, meaning white control of the economic resources, and actually to work against the interest of Africans in Africa, or also Africans in the United States, or Africans wherever they are. So that carries on to so many places. That's why you have businesses that are, like I said in my previous video about Haiti, there are businesses in Haiti that there's probably black people running those organizations. Yet those businesses were created to benefit white interests and not benefit the African people. So even though there might be a black face inside of these institutions, the purpose is all ultimately to support the system that has always, there's never been a day where capitalism has not done for blacks what it has done for whites. Never has there been a day. So this institution has been built to do for whites what it will not do for blacks. And the fact is, a company that has that focus is always going to do so, and no matter what, who's inside of it. That's why I always kind of like when I'm looking online, I see certain things like, oh, you should clap because this is the first black CEO of this company, or this is the first black president of this company, and that's supposed to be something we clap about. This is the first black mayor of this city. But guess what? You can check on different cities that have black mayors, black politicians. You could check on different companies that have black CEOs, black executives. The fact is, they're still, if they were created to have a capitalist model, they were created to ultimately benefit white supremacy, the white supremacist system. That's just what is in their DNA. And expecting them to change that operation because they have a black face inside of it, that is being very naive, because if you know how capitalism operates, it operates for the purpose of benefiting the overall system, not to tear the system down. So why are we getting to all this? Because there's been a lot of mentalities from different people in the United States, different people in the Caribbean, that why would you think about what's going on in Togo? Why would that be something so important to you? Because we have to think about ourselves. I mean, we have a whole movement called the DOS movement right now, unfortunately happening in the United States, where people are trying to separate from being Africans and say, well, I'm not African, I'm a descendant of slavery. And they want to make their entire struggle about being a descendant of slavery. which is not a threat to any form of white supremacy, because you were allowed to be a descendant of slavery in the white supremacist system. You're not allowed to have black power, and you're not allowed to have African liberation in a white supremacist system, but you can certainly be a descendant of slavery inside of a white supremacist system. So we have a lot of people who try to separate, and what's going on in Togo right now is something that we should all be talking about, because, and I'm going to read just a little bit from a news clip. You know, something interesting that happened with Togo is that the protests that were started recently, there was actually kind of like a ceasefire that was going on because Ghana and Guinea, their government, decided to intervene and decided to basically try to get the people to stop protesting. And that should be one question. Why was it seen in your interest that the people stop protesting in Togo? Especially somewhere like Ghana is considered a formidable democracy. So what was it in your interest that those people not protest? And those two regimes felt like that the fact that the people are suffering, the fact that the people are living in these horrible conditions, as you've seen in this video, the fact that the government is practicing horrible human rights catastrophes against the people, imprisoning political prisoners, killing people, beating them, torturing people. Despite all of this, we want you to stop protesting. Now, I would think that Ghanaian citizens or Guinea citizens, if it was them, they would not feel like we want you to stop protesting. They would say we want you to actually get something done so that our people can live peaceably. However, the way that white supremacy has operated with us is that we really think we're separate. In Ghana and Togo, they border each other. Yet the president of Ghana felt like what was going on in Togo wasn't of importance to him as far as the suffering of the people. All that was of importance is that the regime be maintained because that's one of his allies. So just think about that for a second. We're being programmed that even though you're my neighbor and you live in the neighboring country, that I'm not supposed to feel for what's going on with your people. I'm not supposed to actually try to do something for your people. I'm not supposed to see your liberation as linked to my liberation. And this is very intentional. So it gets even worse, of course, when we go through different parts of the diaspora, because that's where we're actually separated by oceans. But not only are we separated by oceans, we're separated by histories that have been whitewashed, that have been brainwashed, and many of us have been told that we're not African. Many of us have been told that we're not, that's not our homeland. Many of us have been told that our history began in slavery, and that's all that we should see ourselves as. But understand the issue with that is that there's a reason that things are going on in Togo. There's a reason why things are going on in Haiti. There's a reason things are going on in Jamaica. There's a reason why things are going on wherever black people are. It's because our ultimate identity, as far as how we're going to do, what we're going to live like, how we're going to be perceived in the world, has always been linked to us being African, and never been linked to you being an American. I'm an American by nationality. That hasn't exempt me from racism. That hasn't exempt me from the United States imperialist policies in my own neighborhood. That's never exempt me from having to deal with those things. So the idea that you're exempt based on your nationality, based on being from Guinea, that you're exempt from what's going on in Togo, it's just not true. So just to give another update, so basically I'm reading from an article on Bloomsburg, and it's saying Togo's main opposition plans to hold a nationwide protest on Thursday to demand the government to hold preparations for the December 20th local election, in which only some small parties and independent candidates will participate. Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets to demand an end to the rule of President FAL last year, prompting talks led by Ghana and Guinea. And while negotiations resulted in a date for a local vote, the opposition says the government hasn't fulfilled promises it made to the mediators of the economic community of West African states. So that's very interesting. The fact that, notice that whenever promises aren't kept with European countries, those things don't just go unanswered. However, in the African country, this FAR and Gasingbe he made promises, and yet no one has actually felt like they needed to hold him accountable. So that tells you one thing. Number one, the talks that were originally happening between Ghana and Guinea and Togo, it wasn't happening because they actually wanted to get justice for the people in Togo. Instead, it was happening because they wanted them to stop protesting. So they weren't mad at what the people were mad at. You know, you've seen the images. You've seen the images of people looking deathly, and there's images of people in prisons who are crowded. There's horrible images. They weren't moved by that. They were only moved by the fact that the people had something to say about it and actually went out and did something about it. That should tell you so much, the mentality that has been built into us by white supremacy, that my problem is not your problem. My problem is that you are actually calling things out. I don't mind that your family is in jail right now. I don't mind that your family is being tortured. My problem is when you have something to say about it, because that actually makes me feel unstable. Because all of us ultimately have dirt inside of our countries that could actually be exposed. That's the mentality that runs rampant. So, going on, Togo's opposition is trying to block government proposals to change the constitution and set a 2-term presidential limit that won't be applied retroactively, paving the way for Gasimbe to extend his time in office by another 10 years from 2020. While there aren't any term limits currently, the coalition of 14 parties seeks to reinstate the 1992 Constitution that set a 10-year limit for presidents. So, could you imagine having to deal with Donald Trump for 10 years? This is exactly what's going on in Togo. Not only has the president been in power and his father been in power 30 plus years, but he wants to extend it and extend it and extend it. And I've talked about this before. The reason that they want to extend their presidencies isn't because they want to serve their country. It's because of the good money that they're getting from being in those positions. From being in a position to allow your country to get raped by Western imperialist forces, from neocolonialism. By being the person who's a doorkeeper, you have a very lucrative life. You get to be a billionaire, honestly. You'd be surprised. You have this image of these leaders being humble. No, they're not humble. They're actually billionaires. Multi-millionaires, if not billionaires, because of the position that they have being the president of their country. So, all of this has been going on, and we see that the West African nations are not saying anything. And obviously, a lot of us in the diaspora are not saying anything. A lot of us are not speaking out. This is, I believe, the longest dictatorship in Africa to have been running. And I've heard Africans in America, we speak out against Saudi Arabia because that's what Western news wants us to speak out against. We'll speak out against China whenever they want us to speak out against China. We'll speak out against Russia. And when has Russia ever been something that we should be concerned with? We'll talk about all these things that they want us to talk about. But we won't talk about things that actually affect our own interests. And we won't talk about things that actually affect us in common. As I said, this can only happen with African people because of our position in the world, our economic position. There's a reason why wherever you go in the world, if you see African people, we're all living inside of similar circumstances. So the other thing I want to bring up is understand that white supremacy, they don't have the same mentality about whites who are throughout the world. So if you notice, France right now is having a lot of protests. And you notice that's what's on the news all the time. France's protesters are having these great protests over gas hikes. So that's their business, right? It's not their business. America sees it as their business. England sees it as their business. All European powers see it as their business because they understand that they're not in this alone. They're not on an island. They're actually all connected. Similar to, I believe it was Greece, who went bankrupt. All the European powers, they were watching closely. They had to step in and actually bail out Greece. Why? Because they understood that if Greece went down, it wasn't just going to be Greece. It's going to be every single power similarly situated. Same thing as whenever there are mass shootings inside of European countries. You see European people throughout the world are paying close attention. Why is it that they understand this principle, that they are all linked? A lot of these same powers are all colonialists, neo-colonialists. So they understand that if France goes down, that could affect a whole lot of what's going on in the United States, in Britain, in Belgium, in all these countries. They understand what's at stake. Yet us who are so much more, who need actually to understand the relations between each other, we don't understand what's at stake. Let that sink in, and let that honestly, let it trouble you. Because we have to ultimately wake up. We have to start calling things out and start talking about things, because if we don't, we are working against our own interests. So I'll just say this again: the isolation mentality, that mentality of why am I worried about what's going on in Haiti? I'm African American. I'm a descendant of slavery. Why am I worried about what's going on in Ghana? I'm a descendant of slavery. I'm Togolese. Why am I worried about what's going on in South Africa? There's a reason why the African person around the world is constantly subjected to the worst conditions. It's because we're in the worst position to be exploited, and unfortunately we're the least likely to wake up and understand that our issues are not for ourselves, but they're actually international. So that's all I'm going to talk about as far as that. As I told you all, so this is a book by Dwayne Obawale, who's the Minister of Information for the Federation of African Liberation. If you would like to buy the book, and I would say please support him, because this is a brother who gives himself to the struggle, gives himself to the, especially the fight in Togo. He writes a lot of books. He's someone that you would like to support, want to support, honestly. You can buy the book on Amazon, Dwayne Wong, and you can see in quotations Amawale. The book's called Far Must Go. Now, we understand in the Federation of African Liberation, not everyone has funds. Not everyone can just buy a book. So if you are one of those people, we will give you the book for free. So if you can just email us and let us know that you would like the book, we will send you a copy of the book. Again, this book breaks down what has been going on in Togo since 1967, as far as how the country has gotten to be how it is today, why it's so important that the people be liberated, and just breaks down the overall liberation struggle in Togo. So again, you can get the book for free if you email us at the Federation of African Liberation, or if you would like to support Dwayne, please go ahead to Amazon and buy the book from there. So that's all I have for you all today. I'll see you on another video.